Hello, bonjour, Alberta. Did you know that at least 238,000 people speak Français in Alberta? And those numbers just keep on growing? Oui, oui, c'est vrai, it's true. And thanks to Shaw TV Community Access Programming, we get to reach out to everyone to let you know all about special people, places, events, and activities happening right here in this great province, in both English and en français. That's right, mes amis. We begin the first part of our program in English, and then we repeat it en français. So stay with us. Restez à l'écoute.
Welcome everyone to Hello, Bonjour, Alberta. I'm Anne Boiteau.
And I'm Marc Lalonde.
And today we're very pleased to chat with the Honorable Constance Hunt, a retired judge who has graced us with her presence and will talk to us about her life as a judge and how she started. So,
welcome.
Welcome, Mrs.
Thank you very
Hunt.
much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And before we start in the legal side of things, we'd like to ask you where you're from.
Well, I was born in a small city in eastern Saskatchewan called Yorkton. And that's where I grew up. It was a city for Saskatchewan's purposes, but in those days I think you only had to have 5,000 people to have city in Saskatchewan, so it was a pretty small place.
And did you learn French there?
Well, in a manner of speaking, but in those days, I'm talking in the early 60s when I went to high school there. I'm afraid the French teachers weren't very good. In fact, it was typically just, in my case, it was a man who was of Ukrainian heritage who had to teach something, and so they had him teach French. And so well, certainly, we learned grammar, but we certainly didn't learn anything about how to speak French. So, but I then did study French when I was in university, and then I had proper teachers, but you know, I had a lot of catching up to do.
And where was university?
University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon.
Oh, okay. Saskatoon.
And your first degree was?
Well, my first degree was a Bachelor of Arts in French and sociology. But in those days you could get a law degree without having a bachelor's degree first.
Okay.
So it was a very fast way to get a bachelor's degree. I only studied for 2 years before I went to law school. So I was very young when I started law school.
Okay. And what made you go to law school? Anybody in your family?
No. There were no connections whatsoever in my family to the law, but it was just, it was the late 60s. There were a lot of things happening in the States, the race riots and the Vietnam War, and you know, there was a lot of change afoot. And for whatever reason, I'm a bit vague about this now, but at the time I thought that going to law school or becoming a lawyer would be a good way to influence change in society, because of course at that age I thought everything needed to be changed. The sooner the better. And so I thought having a law degree would be a good way to accomplish that.
And so you did? And then did you practice in Saskatchewan?
No, I had a very untraditional career. I worked in legal aid for a while, and then I worked as part of that, I worked in some Aboriginal communities in northern Saskatchewan, and then I worked for a national Inuit organization in Ottawa, and I traveled a lot in the Arctic. I didn't live in the Arctic, but I traveled a lot. And then I went to graduate school, and at that point they were just about to open a law faculty at the University of Calgary, which, well, the University of Calgary was a young university at that time, but I was recruited to come here and teach when the law school opened in 1976. So I ended up being a law professor for a lot of my career, although I did go and work in the oil industry for a couple of years because I'd gotten interested in that aspect of law, which sounds like a bit of a shift from changing society, going to work in the oil patch. But working in the Arctic, I could see the connections between resource development and the environment and culture, and so that was what brought me to wanting to learn about resource development.
And so when you were in Calgary, you continued learning French, or?
You know, I didn't really learn French at all. I think I had about an 18-year hiatus when I think I barely spoke a word of French and never heard it. And then I think it was in late 1988, I had a chance to participate in something called the Governor General's Study Conference, which was a program for young leaders. And they would take these groups of young people up to the age of about 40, and we would go for 3 weeks to a certain region of the country. And the group that I was in had a mélange of unilingual Anglophones, unilingual Francophones, and people of various degrees of facility in the other language. And then I was really plunged back into French again, and I was really excited by that. So that got me interested in pursuing French some more, and it was not too many years after that when I was appointed as a judge to the Court of Queen's Bench in Alberta, and then I discovered that there was an excellent program in French, immersion courses for judges, because they needed judges all over the country who could work in French. And of course I had a good background in French, but again, I didn't speak it all that well. And it was really the time, those courses for the members of the judiciary, where I really learned to speak French.
So how did you come to be a judge? What process was that?
By accident, really. Somebody, I was dean at the law school, and as in that capacity I was working a lot with people in the downtown and with judges and lawyers, and somebody who was a judge encouraged me to apply, because you have to make an application. And he assured me that I might never get appointed to the bench, or it might take several years. And so I thought, well, that sounded interesting. Although I think, like most people, I didn't really know anything much about the reality of being a judge. You don't. It's like any job. You don't know what it's like until you do it.
Yes, yes.
And so to my surprise, I got appointed quite quickly, like within a matter of months. And then I had these sleepless nights wondering if I had made a horrible mistake, because I had no idea really what I was getting myself into. But fortunately for me, I really liked being a judge, and it turned out to be a tremendously interesting way to spend 24 years of my life.
Wow, 24 years.
Yeah.
And you said earlier it was like being a student when you were...
Well, most of the time I was on the Alberta Court of Appeal, and when you're on the Court of Appeal, you have to learn all the time, because every case, you cover everything under the sun, really. It could be family law, contract law, commercial law, criminal law, everything. And of course it's impossible for any person to know all of those areas of the law. So every time you got a new case with a difficult legal problem, you just had to plunge in and learn all the law that you could as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And did that contribute to your eventual doctorate?
I don't know. I was very thrilled to get an honorary doctorate from the University of Calgary about a year ago. I don't exactly know why they gave me a doctorate, but perhaps it was, you know, I had long connections with the university, of course, but it was a wonderful recognition for sure.
And you have heard one or more cases in French at the Court of Appeal?
I did, yes. I heard some in Alberta and also in the Northwest Territories, because we did the appeal work for Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, and there were a number of language rights cases that came out of the Northwest Territories that I was involved in, and also in Alberta. But
And how did you find that? How was that? Was that more difficult for you, or?
Particularly the first case that I heard in French, and I was the most senior judge on the panel. I had 2 colleagues who were fluent in French, but I was chairing, which meant that I was the one that had to control the process. And I don't mind saying I was pretty nervous the first time I did it, but it got easier, of course.
Yes.
But the good thing about hearing cases in French when you're an appeal court judge is that you get a lot of the material in writing ahead of time, so you know what the case is about. And so that made it a lot easier. But the writing in French, I think, is a real challenge. I mean, writing is a real challenge, but writing in a foreign language, not to mention one as difficult as French, is a real challenge.
So what's the other process like? You were a judge for 24 years. Now you're retired. You're obviously still have quite a lot of life ahead of you, at least we hope so.
I hope so.
What are you up to, and how much of a contrast is it to leave that position?
It's nice not to have to think so terribly hard all day, every day, because especially being an appeal court judge is mentally, intellectually very taxing. But I know I've been involved in a number of volunteer projects since I retired, and 2 projects in particular in Africa, one in Kenya and one in Morocco. And those were both to do with helping to educate the judiciary. And I had already worked a couple of different times in Rwanda, so in French, by the way, which was challenging for other reasons, because
the accent,
you have the accents, exactly.
Everything is different.
But it's really great to have the opportunity to see how these legal systems operate in other countries, and hopefully to be able to make a small contribution. But ultimately, I always find that getting involved in things like that is much more educational for me than it probably is for the people that I'm working with.
Well, volunteerism is like that.
I think that's true.
The person volunteering gets as much, if not more, out of it than the person that's being helped.
Very, very, very true.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
And did you enjoy being in Morocco and Rwanda?
Oh yes, it was fascinating. I mean, the cultural differences are immense.
Enormous.
And in fact, it was somewhat surprising to me that people the working language is Arabic, not French, although some people speak French, but they don't have the comfort level with French that they do with Arabic, and some of the other people I was working with did not speak French, so we had simultaneous translation between Arabic and English when we were interviewing people, and that was a challenge too. And also, I think from a cultural point of view, as North Americans, we maybe tend to be a little bit more direct when we ask questions, and certainly if you're a judge and you expect a direct answer. But I felt in that culture, I think people are a little more subtle, shall we say. And so it was not always that easy to get to the bottom of what we wanted to find out. But it was a fascinating experience.
Great.
Well, super interesting. We will be continuing in French in a moment. Thank you, everyone. Please stay with us. We continue en français.